The Prime Minister suffered a big resignation today following his decision to cut the foreign aid budget to boost defence spending. Anneliese Dodds quit as International Development Minister over the controversial decision, which left some in the Labour Party with a sense of unease about the move. In her resignation letter, she warned Sir Keir Starmer that it would be impossible for him to deliver his priorities, such as support for Gaza, Sudan and Ukraine, as well as vaccinations, because of the deep cuts her former department would suffer. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan has more on this story developing this lunchtime.
Anneliese Dodds put a brave face on it, arriving at Cabinet on Tuesday. She already knew then that her international aid budget was being slashed by 40% in order to increase the spending power of the Ministry of Defence. And it appears she had already decided to quit as she listened to the Prime Minister reluctantly announce his decision.
I want to be clear to the House. That is not an announcement I am happy to make.
But she waited until after the Prime Minister's visit to Washington before sending him her letter of resignation. These are unprecedented times, she wrote, when strategic decisions for the sake of our country's security cannot be ducked. Instead, the tactical decision was taken for overseas development aid to absorb the entire burden. Ultimately, these cuts will remove food and health care from desperate people, deeply harming the UK's reputation.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear if Anneliese has resigned. I've been in the convention of the North Conference, but it is a really difficult decision that was made. But it was absolutely right that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet endorsed the Prime Minister's actions to spend more money on defence.
Anneliese Dodds said the cuts to overseas aid were so deep that the government would struggle to meet even the commitments to Gaza, Sudan and Ukraine, which the Prime Minister wants to keep.
It really does highlight that these cuts are poorly thought through and are going to cause a lot of harm. We agree with absolutely everything that she said in her resignation letter about the harm that those will do, and we call on the government to think again.
The Prime Minister returned from Washington this morning after a trip widely seen as successful. His decision to boost defence spending at the expense of aid spending may have smoothed his path with the White House, but it makes relations with his own party more complicated.
Well, let's get more from Carl now. Carl, how big a blow is this for the Prime Minister?
Well, this is not the first resignation from Keir Starmer's cabinet, but it is by far and away the most serious, I think, and that's because it is a resignation over a central plank of government policy with which Anneliese Dodds disagreed. She is also a Keir Starmer loyalist. Remember, she was actually his first shadow chancellor before Rachel Reeves. She remains loyal enough to not only say she agrees with increasing defence funding, just not from the overseas development budget, but she was also loyal enough to hold back on her resignation to give him a clear run in Washington this week. And I think it is also serious because it highlights just how much this decision to cut overseas aid spending has alienated a large number of the Prime Minister's own MPs and his supporters within the Labour Party. That said, I think many people within the party, like Anneliese Dodds, will still agree that defence spending did have to rise. And the fact is that cutting overseas aid to increase spending on defence, although it might not be very popular within the Labour Party, does still remain a popular decision with the general public.